Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language and Literature. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my top tips and process tackling the unseen section of paper 2, paper 2A. Now, I am going to focus on the individual and society. You may have chosen a different topic or theme, but the process itself that I'm going to go through will be relevant to them all. So let's get started. Okay, so let's just look at the basics of the question and the assessment objectives. So obviously this is section A of the whole of paper 2. Now you get 2.5 hours for this paper, but the questions, the marks are weighted differently. So this one is actually only worth 20 marks, whereas the comparison question is worth 30. So, you know, some people say, oh, still split it so you've got time for annotations, but I'm not sure if that's the right call because I think the comparison question is so big. So I've said an hour-ish, maybe an hour and 10 minutes planning, 1 hour writing, which means that you've got a good hour and 20 minutes for the second part of the paper. We've got 3 assessment objectives here. So our usuals are AO1 and AO2, which is about using terminology, having a critical style, and obviously analysing across the text a range of literary and linguistic concepts. But we also have AO3, which is, of course, context. And you might think to yourself, well, that's horrible because how am I to know the context of an unseen? So we've got a couple of different ways of looking at this. I'm doing this based on the kind of concept of the individual and society, but the same rules apply if you're doing any of the other sections. You need to make yourself aware of the sort of cultural movements over the last 100 odd years that sit within your area. So for the individual and society, I mean, you might, for example, look at the civil rights movement and just make sure that you're very much aware of that. You might look at kind of cultural shifts in terms of gender. You know, a couple of years ago, or a couple of papers ago, I should say, I think it was the extra one that they put on, you know, for the CAGS sort of situation, was all about, you know, a writer who was transgender, a sports writer who's transgender. So obviously that sits within a kind of cultural context that we're living in at the moment. So yes, a kind of understanding of the social, historical, cultural context of the areas in which the individual and society or your chosen theme sit within is important. But you also have this little bad boy. It says in which texts are produced and received. Okay, so that means that you can actually get some AO3 points for looking at conventions of the form as well. So it's important to revise that. And if you want any guidance there, I've done a full video which takes you through pretty much every single text type on the planet and what those key conventions are. So do have a little look at that. Right, let's get into a bit more detail. Right, for me, this is the way, yeah? That is approaching the text by constantly thinking about the VAI, values, attitudes, and ideas. So values, attitudes, and ideas really means what their thoughts, feelings, belief systems are. Now, values, attitudes, and ideas, it might be the writer's values, attitudes, and ideas surrounding a particular topic, or it might be the way that the writer presents certain values, attitudes, and ideas. So you've kind of got to look at the question in order to help you suss that out. But again, it's sat within the context of your chosen area. Obviously, with individual and society, that's quite straightforward. But I'll show this to you in action in just one moment. So let's imagine we're in the exam. What's the first thing we're going to do? Well, before, this is my recommendation, people might do it differently. I say read the question before you've even touched the extract, okay? And if you can, even just from the question, see if you can figure anything out about the gap, about the genre audience and the purpose. So this top one here was, can't remember which year it was, but this is an actual past paper. And this one is a question that I sort of made up based on an old paper from the old Edexcel spec. So this one here, critically evaluate how Karen Jones's letter is crafted to inform and persuade its readers. In your answer, you must comment on linguistic and literary features, relevant contextual factors. Now, this one is quite helpful because it actually tells us the mode, it tells us the genre straight away. We've got letter, yeah? But you'll probably be thinking, hang on a minute, what kind of letter is an inform and persuade to readers plural? So you might start questioning, is this a private letter or a public letter? So immediately start asking yourself questions. You're also given some aspect of the purpose. We're told inform and persuade, but we don't know the overall purpose in terms of what is Karen Jones's letter trying to persuade people of. Okay, so that immediately hopefully will start asking some questions. This, as an example, doesn't give that much away. Critically evaluate how the writer presents attitudes towards Neil Armstrong and astronauts in general. Obviously, it gives us a little bit more of a focus on what the values, attitudes and ideas are going to be about and the actual topic, whereas that one is a little bit more mysterious. But in terms of genre, audience and purpose, we're getting a little bit of a hint at the purpose here, but not that much. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to read the blurb, which again is going to give you a little bit more about genre, audience and purpose. So going back to good old Karen's letter, this is the blurb. This is the text of a charity appeal produced by the Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind in 2017. It takes the form of an open letter from the mother of a child with autism. It was distributed as a supplement inside a weekend newspaper. The printed letter included a number of photographs of the child named Sky with her dog named Yolo that are not included here. So it's telling you that there were graphological features, but not now. So actually we can learn a whole lot more, not just about the genre, audience and purpose, but about context. And we can even start thinking, well, hang on a minute, what are potentially the values, attitudes and ideas going to be? Can we kind of make some judgments there? But, you know, in terms of your context, if you're thinking about, you know, kind of cultural, societal contexts, you might be thinking about the kind of growing focus on neurodiversity. You might be looking at the kind of idea about charity appeals and the way that people now charity fundraise. When you're thinking about genre, audience and purpose, you might question whether or not this is real, or whether or not this has been crafted deliberately, or whether it's a little bit of both, particularly because we know it's an open letter and it's part of an appeal. So this is obviously going to be, because it's part of a charity appeal, this is going to be asking people to donate. So you might want to ask yourself the question, is this actually a real text? Is Karen and her child real? Either way, you know, you can make a judgment, you can kind of posit that and perhaps even the introduction and then go from there. Now this one, the old one, an extract from an obituary published in the Economist, sorry, I can't speak, magazine in August 2012. Okay, so we're not given quite as much detail as here, but we now have the mode or the genre, which is an obituary, and because we know it's about Neil Armstrong, we can start making some judgments about values, attitudes and ideas immediately. We can start making some assumptions about the kind of register that we're going to see in this, based on where it is published. We're going to, you know, we're going to start thinking about the conventions of the form, so the conventions of an obituary. So yeah, at the moment that you do this, you can start almost like planning in your mind your AO3. Okay. The next thing you're going to do is, of course, actually read the unseen, and then all of the questions that you've been asking yourself, hopefully you'll answer. Now, some people like just to read it through once without making any annotations. That's fine if that's your way. Some people are already armed with a highlighter or a pen to start picking things out. But when you're doing your reading and your first annotation, what you should be picking out is not devices. It should be the values, attitudes and ideas. Okay, so as you imagine the extract in front of you, you're going to be writing down the side like a trigger word that's going to help you with your topic sentences later on for your paragraphs, that summarizes a value, attitude or idea being presented. Okay, once you have done that, so once you have thought to yourself, right, he is presenting Neil Armstrong as humble, his view is that Neil Armstrong is humble, only then can you go back and say, right, how is he doing it? Let's find the features. You must be really careful that you don't just end up with a catalogue of features that aren't attached to proper, well thought out points. Okay, that's actually something that comes up in the examiner's report almost every single year, that the lower ability students, or the students that performed worse on the paper, were those that just systematically feature spotted and was like, oh, you know, that's alliteration. But if it's not attached to a value, attitude or idea, and then obviously developed impact, it's not going to be as helpful. Do a bit of speedy planning. Number your annotations. I like this approach to annotation. I do this, I know it sounds a bit basic, and I do use it with my GCSE students as well, but I think it works. If you take a whole text structure approach whilst you're planning, not whilst you're writing, I'll explain what I mean, you can make, like, it allows you to get a kind of sense of the whole message. So if you ask yourself, right, how does it open? Like, what's going on at the beginning? Where does it change? Like, is there a shift in tone, a shift in topic? Are there multiple? And then how does it end? Like, are the views that end the piece the same as at the opening, or are they different? Is there a kind of a dramatic shift? Is the actual message right at the end? Because that does sometimes happen. So as you're going through your annotations, how does it open? Where does it change? How does it end? I don't want you to write your essays chronologically. I mean, you can if you want, but it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous for the following reasons. You might run out of time. Yeah, and in which case, you know, you might have missed out on a real bit of gold dust at the end. And on that note, there have been some pieces where actually the sort of answer, like the real important message, has been delivered at the end of the piece. And if you run out of time, then you're kind of missing the point. And that's when your essay reads like a kind of feature spotting. So what you actually have to do the whole text structure approach for your annotations and use that to come up with a kind of, this is what the message is, and then evaluate which are the most important parts of that unseen to demonstrate that message, that main value, attitude and idea. So you might start by writing about the beginning and the ending together, for example, and then go into the middle afterwards. That's absolutely fine. But don't just go, I'm going to write about paragraph 1. Now I'm going to write about paragraph 2. Now I'm going to write about paragraph 3, because you're not necessarily going to get everything that you need out of it. Step 5, write the darn thing, please. Yeah, so let's just start with intro. I would strongly recommend that you write a brief intro and you start hitting some assessment objectives, AO1 and AO3. Obviously not AO2, because we're not going to analyze in our intros. So what are we going to do? We're going to establish the genre, audience and the purpose. Yeah, we're going to pay particular attention to purpose, because that is obviously where our values, attitudes and ideas lie. Okay, and because you've obviously already gone through your unseen and done all of your VAIs down the side, you should have this kind of real understanding, hopefully, of what the point of it is. Yeah, and if you can sort of sum up that main value, attitude or idea, that main point, in a sentence, it needs to go into your intro, and then you're showing your examiner right away that you mean business. And if you can sit it within some sort of relevant cultural, societal, historical context to hit AO3 as well. Here is one I made earlier. Right. Oh, it's got a typo in it. Whoops. The extract from Neil Armstrong's obituary is written to celebrate his life and noted achievements. Given the genre, one would expect the writer to present both a positive and respectful view of Armstrong, and this convention is certainly met. As a renowned astronaut, famous for being the first man on the moon, this obituary would have a wide audience, particularly readers with an interest in current affairs and history. As well as presenting Armstrong to be humble and self-deprecating, the author also conveys the attitudes of the public at the time, their awe and admiration of him and astronauts in general. So do you see here? I mean, this isn't like this isn't the most spectacular or sophisticated introduction here, but it does tick all of the boxes. Okay, other than that bit, sorry. Right, so we have a sense of the purpose right here. We doff our caps to conventions of the genre. and whether or not they're met. We bring in a tiny little bit of AO3. Hopefully everyone would know that Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. We talk about the audience, okay, and who they're going to be, and then we just sum up the most important value, attitude, and idea at the end, okay? That's the kind of thing that you are looking for. Okay. Now, I was talking before about using sort of like trigger words or phrases to help you think about values, attitudes, and ideas. So this is the kind of thing it would look like. So yeah, humble is presented as humble, or an adulation, that's the way that the general public feel about, that's the ideas that they have about them, that they're to be worshipped. This bit here is talking about how, you know, astronauts are supported by other people, that they're not the heroes because actually they've got these huge teams. So do you see what I mean? I'm creating just like little words and phrases that almost like just summarize the attitudes or the beliefs or the thoughts that the writer is presenting here. And I'm doing this so that I have got some good stuff for my topic sentences. And I'm going to show you this now. I see so much of this. The writer uses a triad to convey his feelings about Neil Armstrong. Okay, so, and I get it because you're trying to use your critical terminology. I do understand that. But first off, if you start with the writer uses a triad, then you're saying to your examiner, this whole paragraph is about a triad, which means that if there are other things going on in the quote, you're sort of limiting yourself. You've also not said anything about what his feelings are about Neil Armstrong. So you're not actually hitting values, attitudes, and ideas. All you're saying is the writer has one. He has some feelings. You need to tell us what those feelings are. So a better topic sentence would be something like this. The writer not only presents the public's admiration of Armstrong, but the respect he received from people of power and authority. Yeah, okay, I've not used a critical term there, but I don't need to because I'm going to do that in the rest of the paragraph. But what I have done here is very, very clearly outlined value, attitude, idea. Right, let's look at this, using this as a paragraph developed. There's not any typos here. Okie dokes. The writer not only, The writer not only presents the public's admiration of Armstrong, but the respect he received from people of power and authority. He uses passive voice describing how the astronauts were mobbed on return. The use of passive voice portrays how the astronauts were not in control of the crowd's fervour, highlighting how enthused they were. Furthermore, the triad in the complex sentence, presidents, prime ministers and kings jostled to be seen with them, highlights that the excitement wasn't limited to the general public, but figures of authority. The pluralized nouns demonstrate how global the respect was. It wasn't just leaders from the USA, but figures from all over the world. With the triad here forming the subject of this sentence, the combination with the verb jostled connotes excitement, but also chaos and possibly even aggression. The presidents, prime ministers and kings are associated with the earlier passive verb mobbed. The writer here creates almost a sense of hysteria, demonstrating once more the awe that even global leaders felt in the wake of the mission. Okay, so do you see that by having a more open topic sentence, I've been able to hit a lot more features. Now, this paragraph is quite heavy on the sort of linguistic side of things. There aren't that many literary concepts here. So, you know, in other paragraphs, you'd want to make sure that you've got that balance and that you're looking at some more of the kind of literary devices as well. But you can see how the AO2 is sort of quite nice and tight and concise. And I've not limited myself to just like talking about one thing. So that's kind of what you're aiming for in your unseen. Now, you might say, how do I revise this? Well, revision is tricky. It's practice. That really is your revision. So you've got a few different ways of doing this. So you can go onto the Edexcel website and have a little look at some of their past papers and specimen papers, obviously. But another thing that you can do, which is almost kind of a lower stakes version, is just to pick up the newspaper, particularly like the weekend supplements, particularly sort of, you know, like opinion pieces from The Guardian and such like that, and just have a little read. Just pick up, have a little read of an opinion piece or an editorial or a feature. And just as you're reading it, think, what are the values, attitudes and ideas? And you can do it like really, really low stakes. Just think about it and go, oh, I'd say that and I'd mention that. Oh, look at that. That metaphor backs up that idea, that blah, 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 blah. Or you can actually do full practices, practice paragraphs or practice full texts. I do think with practicing English, you do a little bit of a blend. So yeah, of course you need to do some full papers to practice writing to time, but crafting paragraphs is also a really good way of like building confidence and building skill. So have a little go at that as well. That's it from me. Biggest takeaway from this, values, attitudes and ideas. That's what I want you thinking about. Everything else comes afterwards. If you've got any questions, give me a shout. Just drop them in the comments and I will get back to you. Otherwise, that is it from me. Thank you again and happy revising.